Good morning, everybody. What is up, and welcome back. If you're new here, I am Liz, your host here at Crimes Untold, or Untold Crimes if you are watching, or Crimes Untold if you're watching over on YouTube. If you are listening on Spotify, this is Untold Crimes with Liz. How are you today? I've been watching some really strange stuff about Gypsy Rose Blanchard. This just a raging dumpster fire. I swear. It just gets worse by the moment. It's like she doesn't care about going back to jail. She doesn't care about, or sorry, prison. It's like she doesn't care about the repercussions of her current actions, like against her soon-to-be ex-husband, Ryan. I feel really bad for the dude. He wasn't even shown in a negative light in that show that they did, that series that they did of them, life after lockup, whatever. I really hope that he actually got paid for being on that show because, I mean, it's a complete misjustice for him. And then for her to basically fake that Ken is the dad of her baby, the whole thing doesn't add up. Plus, her timeline of when she got pregnant doesn't add up, because if she actually did get pregnant when she did, she would actually have the baby in February, not January. You're pregnant for 10 months, not 9. 40 weeks is 10 months. Just so you're aware. Most people don't realize that. You can look at gestation charts because you are 40 weeks gestation. That's why they say you are full term at 36 weeks, because you can deliver at 36 weeks, which is 9 months. Anywho, yeah, that's just a whole raging dumpster fire of craziness that I've been watching and listening to on various different sources here. I don't. What are your thoughts? Comment down below what you think, especially with the huge, could be thing that just was kind of talked about, was that Gypsy actually set up her ex with in the death of her mother. Like, absolutely bizarre. And then the whole Ballerina Farms thing that's happening right now with trad wives. I've been listening to that shenanigans and all that jazz. But anywho, today we're going to be talking about another cold case. I've been really enjoying these ones. So today we're going to be talking about the murder of, or the unaliving, because people don't like the word murder, the unaliving of Elizabeth Fales, or Betsy, as she went by. So this case is native to my state of birth, which is Massachusetts, which is really cool. I've actually found a few older cases like this one where they're from Massachusetts, and I'm really excited for you guys to learn more about them, because the time in which these happen speaks a lot for how society was, and kind of gives you more of an insight as to now what's happening in the world, because a lot of what's happening now in the world is reflecting on what happened prior, if that makes any sense. So let's talk about this unaliving of murder, because can people just stop being so PC and not taking offense to the word murder? This is clearly, we're talking about a murder. So we're talking about the murder of Elizabeth Fales. So nothing says a great relationship like the constant breakups and taking back of a man who would eventually be responsible for your demise. Well, folks, that is exactly what happened to Elizabeth Fales. Elizabeth Fales lived with her family in Dedham, Massachusetts, and was being courted by a man named Jason Fairbanks. Jason Fairbanks was 2 years her senior at the age of 20, and he was actually residing at his family's homestead on East Street. If I can find a map of the time and show you exactly how things are laid out, you'll kind of understand, like, the town in itself. And Jason Fairbanks derives from a very well-respected family. Both of them did. The Fales family and the Fairbanks family were very prevalent in the area. With Jason, he was born during the infamous American Revolution in 1780, and into a prominent, well respected Puritan family. Puritan families were really well known in the area at this time, as my family, when they came over from England, my dad's side, and my mom's side, when they came over, when my mom's family incorporated Raleigh and my dad's family moved from England. Basically, there was a giant controversy of Puritans in England at the time. And Puritans in England, if you were caught, you were executed. They wanted to purify England during this time. And this, or Puritanism, um, Puritanisms were a reform movement that happened within the 16th and the 17th century, and it was a lot of purifying those from Roman Catholicism, and this started with Queen Elizabeth I. Well, it ended up being a bigger problem than what they wanted, and Puritans ended up fleeing England in the 1700s, the late 1700s. And this was in order to move away from all of the pillaging and basically if they caught you, you would die. And they didn't want to die. So what they did was they decided to, with Baptists and Quakers and Anglicans and Presbyterians, they then would board onto ships and they would come to the New World, which is the colonies. And that's when, obviously, Massachusetts, the colonies were incorporated, and here are these prominent families that are taking over this area, if you will. And that's when, obviously, like the whole Plymouth Rock thing happened, and we have the incorporation of Raleigh, Mass, and there's Dedham, and all these smaller port areas in Massachusetts. That's why if people say they're from Massachusetts, a lot of them have older families. I have a very long line of old family lineage in Massachusetts, in New Hampshire, in Maine, all dating back to this time and even earlier than that. I'm talking like late 1500s and obviously into England. So I'm well aware of my family's line, my family's heritage. If you're related to different families during this time, I would highly suggest you look into it because you'll find some very interesting things. Like, I didn't know I was related to the judge in the Salem witch trials. I didn't know I was related to two of the victims of the Salem witch trials. And I found that out during my genealogical search, basically, if you will, into my family. But enough about that. So, Mr. Fairbanks, he came from this very well-respected Puritan family. But with that, you have to live up to a certain standard, and he didn't. He was told by his parents that they wanted him to look into a trade rather than wasting his time at attempting college due to his inability to be able to do well in school. He just wasn't good at what intellectually, he wasn't good. They felt that he probably would have done better with his hands. But because of his enormous pride, he decided he needed to go to Wrentham Academy to help his enormous ego and to help him better be equipped with a future endeavor for a future position in society to make money. But with that also comes the ideology of, I'm better than everybody else. But he also had another issue. He was also super sick. Like, very sick. He had smallpox at the age of 12. He did receive vaccination from it, but at times he would still feel sickness from it, or like waves from it. Kind of like if you've had COVID, if you have long-term COVID symptoms, like I do, you or I'm not monetized, so I don't have to really care about monetization at this point. But any of those lingering factors of like when you had COVID and long term speaking, that's exactly what was happening with him, but with smallpox. He ended up not being able to use his right arm because it became so numb after his vaccination and it just withered because he couldn't use it. So literally, he had no musculature to his arm. It basically was just skin and bone. He could not use it. But he was also lazy. He was entitled, and he was love struck. He was love struck by Elizabeth Fales. I do also want to mention, too, because of his sickness, at times he would have fevers. This is part of his long term symptoms. He would suffer from fevers. He was extremely tired, like fatigue tired, had severe headaches, and his lungs would bleed, and he would be too weak to do anything due to this poor health. So he had bouts of time where he couldn't do anything. So his only saving grace basically was listening to his parents or being the dumb man that he was, which was falling in love with a girl that didn't want him. And that's exactly what he did. He would be obsessed and love a girl named Elizabeth Fales. She would also go by the names Eliza or Betsy, which are no nicknames for Elizabeth, or there's Lizzie or Betty or Beth. There's a whole lot, or Liz. There's a whole bunch of different nicknames for my lovely name because I also am an Elizabeth. So this lovely man became infatuated and borderline obsessed with her. He would spend time writing love poems to her, love letters, then rather than paying attention to his general studies when he was at Rentham Academy. It's kind of to be expected because when you read about how she looked, you always hear the same thing. She was a beautiful young woman. She was pretty and vivacious. She had a red curly hair, like auburn curly hair, that was shoulder length, and she would glow due to how modest. And it said like her virgin modesty. That's why she would glow, because she was so perfect. She was like the vision of perfection for a young woman in this time. And it's also said that she would be the perfect future wife, which is what he thought. This is more than likely why he fell in love with her. Her looks, how pure she was, and that she would be the perfect image for the perfect wife. For him, especially where how sick he is, it would be absolutely perfect for him. But it's unknown whether or not they were actually more than friends by any standards. We know based on what her family says, but we don't actually kind of know. So, which I'll kind of talk about. So, Eliza's friends weren't fond of him because of how strange he was. And Mr. Fales, which is Eliza's dad, is said to have banned her from seeing him. I mean, I don't blame him. Jason apparently also told one of his friends that if Eliza didn't marry him, that he would take her chastity. What a nice man, right? So you're going to force yourself on a woman that doesn't want to marry you. How is that okay in any means? Yeah, I don't know. It's not right. That we are going to be looking into. So Eliza went to a neighbor's house, this is around noon of that day, to get her book of the history of Lady Jane Mandeville back. Unfortunately, her neighbor hadn't finished it, so she wouldn't be able to take the book at that time. She ended up staying at this neighbor's house until about 1 p.m. because she was playing with their small child that obviously lives there. And then after 1, this is when she would leave walking into the pasture. This would be the last time anybody would see her in a normal condition. We don't know whether or not her and Jason intended to meet one another in this pasture on this day, but due to some things that are known, it does appear that they did plan to meet, or simply Jason intended on finding her that day. So in hand, Jason had a fake marriage certificate that was created as a ruse for Eliza to give himself to her under false pretenses of them being married. So it would be a way for him to be like, see, we're married. You bow down to me. Give yourself to me, which is just highly unjust. it would come to fruition that he had his cousin make this. His cousin created this certificate after he flirted with her while asking about creating the document. I don't know. I've only seen like drawings of this man, and obviously only so much you can get from a drawing. But do you think he was as attractive as a person to be, getting all these, like, attracting their attention? You know what I mean? To stoop down to that level of flirting with your cousin in order to create a fake marriage certificate to bed a girl that doesn't want you. Yeah, I don't. How I'm gonna say this word. How desperate do you have to be in order to stoop to that level? You know what I mean? After this meeting, we don't know exactly what happened. And this happened between 1 and 3 p.m. because how she was found would be the most horrific sight ever. So Jason would mosey over to the Fales homestead covered in blood. Covered in blood. He would speak about how they made a pact of killing themselves together, and he stated that Elizabeth killed herself, but he couldn't do it. Obviously, as a quick reaction, Mr. Fales found Eliza in the pasture with multiple stab wounds, which totaled 11 altogether, and this includes her throat being slit. Jason also had similar wounds, but not as severe as Eliza. He then would justify her wounds with that of her reaction to him stating that they wouldn't be able to be married, which is the complete opposite as to what he said he was going to do. You know what I mean? Apparently, this marriage certificate was ripped up and found next to her body. It also is apparent that this was used as a mere tool to show her that either they wouldn't be able to be married or they were married in secret. And this thought process this dude has is like all over the place. But the truth would come out. So Eliza died. Her wounds were defensive. This was pointed out by the coroner. I'll just say the coroner at the time. And this means that she did not stab herself at all. It also came out from her parents that Eliza had absolutely no interest in Jason in a romantic way. She only saw him as a friend. Back then, if you wanted to be courted by a man, the man needed to go to your dad and ask for your hand in a courtship. That is how it worked. It's the same if you think of the Duggar family or whatever, where the dude asks to court the daughters. Same concept. Because this is when women didn't have rights. So you were property. So man needed to ask a father in order to marry his daughter or to court his daughter in order for the intention of marriage. That's just how the time was then. Now with Jason, obviously, was he so obsessive or that obsessive of a man and wanting to take a girl's virtue for fun, or was he angry because she didn't willingly want to give herself to him because she clearly had no interest in him? That's my thought. Jason Fairbanks was arrested after the deputies talked to her family. He was found guilty at his trial. Now, his trial was not very long. Not very long at all. And at this trial, it said that Betsy or Eliza met him in a birch grove next to Mason's pasture, and she told him that she couldn't marry him, and he went berserk. This came out at his trial. His trial only lasted about 3 days, and obviously it first started at the courthouse, but then it moved to the First Parish Meeting House, which was across the street. And the venue then had to change again to the town common because of how many families came to see this unfold, because this is two prominent families in Dedham, Mass, where you don't know who's going to say what. And we have the then Attorney General defending him. Then the Attorney General, his name is James Sullivan, he would turn into the governor. And the person that was defending Jason Fairbanks was actually the future mayor of Boston and a U.S. senator. U.S. senator. His name is Harrison Gray Otis, and unfortunately, Jason was found guilty. But here's the thing. Here's the fun part about this. So he was made to wait in the Dedham jail until his execution would be carried out. But in August of 1801, so just a few months later, he made some friends and they helped him escape. Oh, yeah. The plan was to make it to upstate New York, in which him and a man named Henry Dukeman would take a boat to some safe passage to Canada. But they were not bright at all. No, they didn't make it that far. No, not at all. They stopped for some breakfast and then would be taken into custody by a three-man posse that included a man named Moses Holt. They were taken into custody in Skenesboro, New York. All because they wanted some breakfast. He then would be taken back on the 10th to Dedham from a Boston jail. It wasn't a long time between when he escaped, when he returned, and then he was executed. I will say too, the cool thing about one of the guys that found him, Moses Holt, he actually was a resident of Hadley, Massachusetts, and he's the one that found them eating breakfast. Why would you stop at a public place to eat some breakfast? You could have just stole something and boot scoot and boogied. I don't know. Anywho, so like I mentioned, Jason was brought back to Dedham and then jailed in Boston because they felt he could have been more of another escape risk at that time if he stayed in Dedham. His order of execution was carried out on September 10th of 1901. He was hung in Dedham, Mass, which is, I agree with. It said that there was thousands of people in attendance for his execution. The oddity of this is that he's also buried in the same cemetery as Eliza in Dedham, Mass. And the cemetery that they're buried in is the Old Village Cemetery. I've actually seen this cemetery before while, looking for family headstones and things like that. Because you tend to get a lot more information when it comes to these things. When you look at headstones or when you pull up old articles. That's why libraries are very, very important, and not just important, but very critical when it comes to cases like this, because not everything is relayed in the correct way. The report from his trial was also published within days of his execution. There was 4 installments in total, and they were published by the Boston firm called Russell and Cutler. I don't believe Russell and Cutler is still a thing anymore, but it was 87 pages long, and it was issued over a course of several months. And this was the first popular trial in which a report was published in New England. Because of this, a number of pamphlets and books would be written in months and years after this case. And one of the earliest novels based on this murder became of it, which is called The Life of Jason Fairbanks, a novel founded on fact. I do, however, have some interesting facts for you as well, but I want to read Elizabeth's inscription on her gravestone for you guys because it's very speaking. We'll just say that. So it says, sacred to the memory of Mrs. Elizabeth Fales, daughter of Mr. Nehemiah and Mrs. Sarah Fales, who was found murdered on May 18th, 1801, in the 19th year of her age. I love how gravestones, how they worded things. Ugh, it's gorgeous. So it then says, sainted shade of heavenly birth, of matchless innocence and worth, since God decreed you should be slain, will cease to mourn nor dare complain. Guardian angels, watch thy swift career. Thy soul in heaven will soon appear. Oftentimes, inscriptions of graves tend to be something that's very powerful in speaking. We'll just say that. But some fun facts I have for you guys is that the Fairbanks homestead still stands to this day, and it's actually still owned by the Fairbanks family. This home is considered to be the oldest timber-framed home in North America as well. Also, this is something that blew my mind. Jason's sixth cousin, Charles Fairbanks, served as vice president to Theodore Roosevelt. What a strange coincidence. Like, you don't think of certain things coming from or spawning from certain crimes in life. You never think that something is going to come from something else. You know what I mean? But that, my friends, is the murder of Elizabeth Fales, or Betsy Fales, Eliza Fales, at the hands of Jason Fairbanks. I hope you guys learned something from this, especially where it comes from such an earlier part of American history, or the time in America, and the colonies to be specific. But I hope you guys learned something from this, and I'll see you guys in my next video, or you'll hear me in my next episode on Spotify. Bye, guys.